Open world driving games were a rare commodity on earlier 32-bit consoles. It wouldn't be until the late 90s when we'd really start to see games come into a different direction. While many other games before had tried these ideas, and some were quite popular to say the least, but it wasn't until 1999 where we would get a game simply by the name of Driver that was developed by Reflections Interactive and published by GT that would literally change the world of open world driving games in a way that had never been seen before. Yes, we had Grand Theft Auto that had been released in 1997 on the PlayStation, which would be a top-down, early 3D, somewhat 2D rendition of an open world concept, but Driver literally set the world alight, not just for its visual aesthetics, which for its time was a very, very impressive game and still holds well by today's standards when we look at it in the grand scheme of things, but the game not only revolutionised the 3D driving genre, but it also added in movie cinematics and a whole film aesthetic to it that had rarely been seen in games up to that point. It captured everything that you would have seen from iconic movies of bygone eras from the 70s, 80s, 90s, with all driving sequences, like when you look at the likes of Smokey and the Bandit, Bullet, the Blues Brothers. All of those iconic movies with those memorable driving sequences proved to be a massive inspiration for the development behind Driver, which would receive many sequels later on, even with the second game that would allow for one of the first games in its class to allow the driver to be able to exit the vehicle to go and steal other vehicles, even just running down the street, so you had full control over the character. Now that wasn't visible in the first game, obviously because of limitations, and they were still trying to figure out how things could work. The game would receive sequels even later on the PlayStation 2 and even the PS3, and while considered decent and solid games, the first game in the series is generally the most looked upon and considered the most popular in the entirety of the online driving space. If anything, when we look at the modern Grand Theft Auto games, especially when you look at Grand Theft Auto 3 that released in the early months of the PlayStation 2's launch period, many of those games, even up to today, a lot of them have taken their inspiration from the overall success of Driver on the PlayStation 1, as it was one of the first true successful games in this format to do really well, as it had everything in abundance. It had a great use of handling physics, dynamics, great attention to detail, and it captured that 70s style aesthetic almost down to a T, even with the cinematics down to the likes of the replay features where you could create kind of like movie sequences and piece them together to create an actual driving experience that you would remember from iconic movies of the past. So in reality, when we think about it, this game proved to be the forefront and set the foundation for many other games that came after it. That would see you travelling through cities such as Miami, San Francisco, Los Angeles and New York, all with the plot being played as an undercover cop by the name of John Tanner, who sets out to infiltrate a criminal organisation, and he becomes their getaway driver. So you have to complete a variety of different missions in order to appease those that you're working for to gain their trust, so that eventually you can take them down from the inside. So the story is very reflective of a movie itself, but then you couple that with the gameplay and all of the modes that are available. There's so much here that reflect all of those interests and aesthetics. It's such a fun game, but I will admit, where the game is more and most noticeable for is its ridiculously difficult training sequence level, where you're in the underground car park where you have to complete a load of different objectives in a very, very strict time limit, and it has to be done to perfection. And even just to do a handbrake turn is very, very difficult because it's so hard to get the car to actually do what you need it to do, even though the handling physics are good in the game. But trying to do all of the things in sequence is very, very hard. It will take many, many tries. It had so much unique appeal to a point that it was one of the best selling games of 1999 when it was released, and it's still heavily looked upon today as the inspiration towards many future titles. Even like I mentioned, the Grand Theft Auto series moving forward with Grand Theft Auto 3, even up until the more recent games, have all taken their influence from Driver itself. Just the training sequence alone in the game is what drives people crazy, because even going back to recording this video, as I went back to play it, now I hadn't played the game in quite a number of years leading up to this, and I found that training scene equally as difficult as I can remember, to a point that I actually couldn't finish it. I tried it so many times and I got to a point where I just got annoyed and I was like, right, that's it. So I went and done some of the other challenges and free race modes just so that I could record enough content to make the video, because trying to get past that training level, I would have been there all day. It was, for me at the minute, it was a waste of time. I'd have to go back to it and put a lot more hours into it, which I will be willing to do, but just at the minute no, because it was just driving me crazy. But then at the same time, I don't have the same patience that I would have had in my younger years to be able to play these games, because they do require a lot of skill, time and patience in order to get the most out of them, and Driver is a direct example of that.
Hey man, watch the thing. Maybe I'll give you a call when I need a ride to the grocery store.
Like when you get the hang of the game and you get into it, if you can get past that training mission, you'll be opened up to a world of possibilities, and if anything, you will have without a doubt one of the best experiences that you can ever have in a driving video game. Even to this day, it still handles and looks so well for what it does. There's very few games that have been ever able to master the aesthetic that it was going for, no more than this game ever has. And it's clear to see why, with its sales, its popularity. Even fans today heavily reminisce on this iconic game, more than most other driving games that are out there. It definitely set the stage, it set the standard, and it's still one of the best, if not the best of its kind, especially on older systems. So that in itself is a whole reason to go back and play it, but just be warned, that training level will drive you insane, and it's definitely the hardest part of the game. I kid you not, it is so difficult. If anything, that's its one weakness, is that bloody training level. It will drive you mad. But aside from that, Driver is one of the best games on the PlayStation, hands down. It's one of the best that has that movie aesthetic to it. Very few games have ever been able to really capture that whole atmosphere and ambience, but this does that down to a T. And it did get better even with the second game that allowed you to, like I said, take your character out of the car, run down the street and steal other cars, which would be a direct influence on the later Grand Theft Auto games that would also use that same style on later systems. So Driver has a lot going for it in terms of what it influenced, but it's a fun game. It's still as good as ever to play. I would recommend that you give it a try, if not play the other games in the series, but this game is definitely one to beat for sure. It's definitely one of the best games, if not on the PlayStation. I would definitely recommend it. But I would love to know your thoughts on this iconic game if you have played it yourself, and what do you think of it overall, and did you find that damn training level is equally as much of a struggle as everybody else has? So be sure to share it down in the comments below, and if you would like to see more content around more iconic games like this that were also released on the PlayStation, then you can check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.